This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
Welcome to the American Theater Wing seminars on working in the theater. These are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, located in Times Square, the heart of the Broadway theater, the off-Broadway theater, and the off-Broadway theater. All come, and they bring you their wares and the excitement of live theater. And this then goes out across the country. And from the country, from the regional theaters and university theaters, come their best to nurture and seed the New York theater. These seminars are designed to give you an inside look of what it is to work in the theater, from the view of the playwright, the performer, the producer, the set designer, the costume designer, the agents, and the guilds and unions who work with and for the people that work in the theater. American Theater Wing is known for its Tony Awards, which is televised nationally each year and is a very prestigious award. I'm very proud of it. It was named in honor of a woman, Antoinette Perry, who believed in preparation for the theater, believed in training for the theater. And so that's what this award is for. It isn't for the longest run or the best box office or the biggest and longest review, but it's for having achieved excellence in the craft of theater. And all of the Wing's programs seem to come from that. A long time ago, this woman's concept that you should give back to the community through the theater what you have gained from the theater. And that's what we do. We start with the Saturday Theater for Children program, which is bringing live theater to school children at the earliest age. We go to a new program, Introduction to Broadway, which, with the cooperation and generosity of the Broadway producers, we were able to get tickets that we in turn give to the Board of Education, the high school division. And they offer these tickets to students who, on their own, pay for a ticket. They pay a very small price, but it's a large price for them. And they make the decision to come to a Broadway theater. The interesting and exciting thing about it is that it's the first time for a majority of these children. They've never been to a Broadway theater, and yet theater has that magic for them. So as soon as a ticket is offered, they raise their hands to come. And now in its third season, some 30,000 children have come to top Broadway productions through this program. There's also a ticket program that we do so that students can come to the Broadway shows, and once again, it's in cooperation with the producers. The American Theater Wing has many friends, and we do the things that we do because of them. We also go out to hospitals, nursing homes, and aid centers, again, with these people from the theater. And now these seminars are just one more program of the Wing's services. And today's seminar is on production. The show Full Moon, which is playing at the Richard Rodgers Theater, and it's indeed a uniquely exciting and wonderful show. And we have with us the producers of the show, the production team, everybody that makes it happen from option to opening. And before I continue this, I'm going to turn it over to our co-moderators, Jean Dalrymple, who has done everything that I've talked about. She's been and is an author, a producer, a playwright, an actress, and a member of the Board of Directors of the American Theater Wing. And George White, who is president of the O'Neill Center, is a director. I don't think he's ever been an actor. I know he's a musician. He's been an actor, too, a musician, and a wonderfully talented man in the role that he plays in developing playwrights, and is also a director at the Yale University. So would you now take over, Jean and George, and introduce the panel to you?
Way down there is one of the most important people in a production, and that is Jackie Green, who is the press representative. That's one of the hardest working people, probably the hardest working person of all these people. I say that. Well, I speak from experience. I was a press agent for years and loved it. Next to her is Daniel Kearns, company manager. There's another very hard-working person in a production. And he's the company manager of this wonderful production, Full Moon. And, of course, he's had many, many companies that he's managed. And next to him is, of course, the great David Schreiner, co-creator and co-star of Full Moon. He has toured with the renowned Cirque du Soleil and Europe in a two-man show with partner René Bazinet, correct?
That's it, yes.
And now we have the co-producer of Full Moon, and he's currently on the executive committee of the board of directors of New Dramatists and co-produced the award-winning Other People's Money and the musical The Rothschild, Jeffrey Ash. Tell them what you're doing now.
Other than co-producing Full Moon together with Jim Freydberg, I'm also co-producer of Wrong Turn at Lungfish with George C. Scott and Jamie Gertz and Tony Danza.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On my right and next to Isabel Stevenson is Robert Kamlot, who his 42nd Broadway show as a general manager is Full Moon, and which he adds to 100 off-Broadway shows. Robert Kamlot. And next to him, on his left, is Dori Berinstein, who is co-producer of Full Moon and is presently executive consultant for Sony Pictures Entertainment and president, this is mind-boggling, of Intergalactic Entertainment, which is a diversified feature TV and special effects production company. And next to her is the co-creator and co-star of Full Moon, Bill Irwin, who created the critically acclaimed largely New York and acted in Lincoln Center in the all-star production of Waiting for Godot. And on my immediate right is James Freydberg, co-producer of Full Moon, who created the American Playwrights Project for Jujamcyn Theaters and is the president of Fremont Associates, which has general managed over 40 theatrical productions. So, welcome all of you. And
a lot of good numbers.
Absolutely.
Now, who's going to start this?
Bill.
George, why don't you pick this up?
I would like to ask, though, that the two of them stay out of the audience for this one, which is and just
have us tied down.
Wide, yes, exactly.
Yeah, we can't go far.
Tell us about how the show got started. Where did it come from?
Well, Full Moon is a conglomeration of things that David and I have done much of our lives, brought together with things we invented last night, some of them, and I guess just about 2 years ago, I saw David when he toured in Cirque du Soleil. Went back and went back and went back and went back because I thought there were some things I could probably steal from him.
And he did.
The most brilliant clown I had seen. And so we had lunch where we didn't know what to talk about in lunch.
There was nobody in the restaurant?
No one in the restaurant. Bad food, too. Then we were serendipitously cast in a movie together where we had to play two clowns in a Sam Shepard picture, and with lots of time in the desert to sort of sit around. So we began to talk about what kind of a show we might do together. And it went from there. I guess David had an invitation that he had to either say yes or no to, and he said, I'll do it if you'll do it with me. And I said, I'll do it if I'm your guest, and I don't have to be the main guy. So last summer at the Lincoln Center's Serious Fun, we managed by half hour to put together a show. And we appeared 2 nights in that piece, which had no title, as I recall.
I remember feeling so guilty because we had to work so hard to put this thing together. We only had like 2 weeks or something.
Something like that.
We had to put this whole show together, and it was just 2 nights. And I thought, geez, well, that's a lot of work for just 2 nights. And then I remember telling Bill one day, well, maybe we'll use it again in the future somewhere, you know.
Well, how does this is interesting too, because I mean, recently there was an article about I think it was just the other day in the Times about being a clown, one of the circus clowns. I mean, the ringling clown. How do you start being a clown? I mean,
oh, I don't know. How do you start being anything?
Okay.
It's sort of. Some people just fall into it accidentally. Some people have planned it from birth. Some people, you know, study and plan out their whole career. It's many different things can happen. With me, it was just an accident. I always wanted to be an actor, and I remember auditioning for a Shakespeare festival in Colorado, and I didn't get the part, so I ended up on the streets. Basically, I saw some clowns on the streets during the summer, and I was working as a carpenter at that time, and I thought, gee, that would be fun. So I went out on the weekends and clowned around, and during the week I built houses, and it eventually became a full-time job.
did you go to Paris to learn your trade too? I mean,
well, I never formally studied. I originally went to Paris just for a holiday for the summer. I had heard that you could work on the streets and the money was good, and I thought, well, gee, that would be fun to go to Paris, work the streets, and pay for my holiday, real romantic vacation. And I ended up staying there. So.
Isn't there a mime school in Paris?
Oh, there's many. There's many mime schools.
And what's the difference between a mime and a clown?
There's a great difference. I mean, mime in this country is now really associated with Marcel Marceau or anybody in a striped T-shirt and a white face who's harassing you and who does it very poorly. And, you know, I mean, Marceau, I guess, really brought mime to this country, and he was definitely one of the greatest mimes. And that is not why I went to Paris. I went there just to work the streets. And let me get back to your question. I guess the difference between a mime and a clown is that mime, I would say, is more of a formal, classical form of physical expression, and clowning is encompasses just about everything. It's comedy, mime, slapstick, dance, anything you want to put into it.
So that the fact that you wanted to be an actor there comes into your clown role as well. That having, I assume, started doing some acting at some point, did you? Or?
Oh, yeah, I studied theater in college.
Where?
For a few years. A little college in Virginia called Christopher Newport. But we had a wonderful theater department. And we had a Polish director who eventually took us to Poland, took the whole class to Poland to visit Grotowski and lots of other theater schools. We toured, actually, a play we were doing, Caligula, Camus' Caligula. And let me tell you, that was a heavy experience because middle of winter in Poland doing Caligula. What a thing to do to a student, you know? I came back completely depressed, anxious. I dropped out of school. I just couldn't. But this is not for me. This can't be what theater's all about. So.
But it really is what theater's all about.
It's one part of what theater's all about.
All right, let's go to our production, Gene, then.
You
You said you went to Paris and worked the streets. You mean you clowned in the streets?
I clowned in the streets, yes. There were some very famous spots to do that in Paris. Beaubourg, the Centre Georges Pompidou, and Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is one neighborhood of Paris. And at that time, it was about 11, 12 years ago, there were some just fabulous street artists. There was Philippe Petit, who's now become a famous wire walker. He was working the streets. René Bazinet. I mean, I could just name a list of people that were just unbelievable. The crowds, I never saw such enormous crowds. And these artists holding, you know, crowds of up to 600-700 people for a solid hour. And it was a real exciting time.
How do they make their living on this?
Well, you do your turns, you do your act, and you pass the hat. And I did that for, I guess, about 6 or 7 years. And I lived exclusively off the money I made on the streets.
Wow. You didn't have to pay an agent for it?
No taxes, no.
That's right. You can do that over there. We aren't broadcasting on Parisian television yet. We'll go to the production team. This is a particularly interesting issue, and perhaps James or Jeff, you could, or Dori could speak to this. Maybe you all could. How did you come out? It's not like receiving a script, particularly. Why the smirk? Come on.
You're absolutely right. There is no script.
Yeah.
Well, what did you... I made that good phrase from option to opening. Let's start. Well, what did you get to say, I'm going to produce a show?
Actually, Bill had come in to see me around that time. And mentioned that he was going to do this. He said, I'm doing this thing, but I don't know what it is, and I'm kind of a guest, and I was going to have and it was like all, typical Bill. God knows what he was saying. And so I said, oh, okay. And then I was off someplace, and then it happened, and I didn't see it. But then I heard about it. And
this was the Lincoln Center?
The Lincoln Center situation, yeah. And I had co-produced Largely New York, which was a previous Broadway piece that we had done, which was with Bill and a myriad of stagehands and many, many actors. It was an unusual piece. It was quite different than this in that it was actually a play. It actually had a plot, even though there weren't any words spoken. I knew what this was when Bill sat down and they told me what this was. And then I met David, and I had seen David several times before, so I pretty well knew what it was. And when I first contacted people who had seen it, and other people, they all said, yeah, it's perfect for an off-Broadway show. It's definitely an off-Broadway show. That's it. And I went, well, I don't know, because when we did the other show, we played in a 1,600-seat theater on Broadway, and then we went to California and played a 2,800-seat theater, and it seemed to be able to come across in a large theater, and then I'd heard this had played at Tully Hall, and that's 1,100 seat. It all seemed to me that it isn't an off-Broadway show. But when we went around and we decided to look at theaters, I did kind of insist that we look at some off-Broadway theaters. And the reason was because so many people in the theater who had seen it had been so insistent that it be an off-Broadway theater and were kind of almost like adamant that I figured I would just like to see their reaction, because I didn't think it was, and I wanted to see how they felt, and they didn't either. At least I could say to anybody, but we did look at that, and it wasn't that. So from there, it came down to deciding who the producing team would be with me. Now, generally what you find happens is that a producer sits down and decides where he thinks he can get the money from. I'm a very collaborative kind of person, although it may not appear so as I dominate some of the conversation. But I actually could be, if I tried. It's that I sat down and I said, well, what we want to do is set up a producing team that can bring something to this to give it a future. So I had kind of mentioned, Jeff and I had been doing another show together, which was the show he mentioned earlier, Wrong Turn at Lungfish, and I kind of mentioned it to Jeff, and he was a gigantic fan of both and had this whole thing and was very, very enthusiastic, and I kind of just mentioned it, but he didn't kind of take me up right away like, I guess I didn't say, would you like to co-produce it, which would have been helpful, right? But I did see that interest. And then I started thinking about, actually the very first person I called, by the way, was Kenneth Feld, because Kenneth Feld knew both of the talents, and he also had a historic record of actually working with this type of performer, and knew and had also co-produced Largely New York with me, so that in reality he was a natural, and right away on the phone it was called, Bill's gotten together with Dave yes. That's what that, yes, what do you think it's going to be? And I said, I thought how much, but fine, we're doing it. So that was settled there, and then the next person was, then I had this Jeff discussion, which was fruitless, and then I couldn't figure out what I was doing. And
at what point in time was that?
That was in the summer. And then the Dori situation came when my company, I had been moving toward a direction of not letting film or television producers come in and take over a production that I have something to do with and taking it on for the future. So I had felt very strongly about having somebody from film and television as a partner, and Dori and I had already been working on some projects together, so I discussed this with her, and the intention was that what she could do, when I go into something with people, it isn't that we just want to do that show. My feeling is that we want to produce them forever, that whenever they have an idea, we want to be there for them. And so that in a sense, the natural thing would be to have somebody, since both these individuals are also interested in film, that somebody come in who could possibly bring them further in a film career if they all kind of meshed together. And that seemed good, so I mentioned to Dori, and she was very excited about it and joined up. And then I went back to Jeff, and that came to the idea of we need somebody who has marketing expertise involved in the production as well. So each producer involved had something they were bringing to it. Besides money. Money was really secondary. The first thing was really, what could they bring to it? Dori in a future, possibly in other areas.
I want to find out what
Jeff in marketing, and Ken because of his experience in that overall form of entertainment. You might go to Jeff.
Yeah, Jeff, tell me about your part in this, and how, when you heard this, then what your mindset was in terms of marketing the process and the project.
Well, when Jim first came to me, I was very excited about it because I did know Bill and David's work, and even though I didn't quite let on to Jim right away, I did have every intention of being involved with it and was very excited about it. I think what Jim was getting into in putting together a production team that had different abilities as opposed to just raising money is quite unique in this setup. Jim being quite a substantial general manager, my background has been in theater advertising and marketing for 25 years. I'm now with Gray Entertainment and do advertising and marketing for several shows there. But that, I guess, is my strength in this collaboration.
Dori, what is your background before becoming a producer?
Well, I've been a producer in film and television, primarily film, for a long time. But my passion has always been for the theater.
Wonderful.
And it's something I've always wanted to do, but I was primarily out in California and I knew one day I'd get involved in the theater, and being tremendous fans of Bill and David, fantasy first opportunity for me to move over into the theater. So my interest was both to support the production team with my expertise in film, but also to launch a career as a pure theater producer as well, and very much appreciate theater and the live theater as opposed to film. It's so much more precious. You have a show and people see it that night. It's not something they could see 6 months later on a video cassette, or they'll see it at 3 o'clock in the morning on TV 5 years from now. You have to be there, and you have to see it live, and it's something that has to be nurtured very carefully. For me, it's tremendously exciting.
And how did you use your film experience? You said you did adapt it to the theater.
Well, there are tremendous similarities, I think, in producing film or television and producing theater in terms of you have a budget, you have a schedule, you have advertising issues. It's a lot of the same components, and you just have to learn the unique areas that are for theater and apply film.
Did you find it an easy step or a difficult one?
Generally easy, but there are a lot of nuances that I think take a lot of time, and every show is so different, and this show will be extremely different than a musical or an off-Broadway piece. So, 42 shows from now on Broadway, I'll say it was easy.
When did the rest of the components of this come on? How do they
Well,
come on board and at what stage? And
it's been mentioned a couple of
did?
times that I'm a general manager, actually a producer and also a general manager. But, we have a team concept of the way we work, in that Bob was brought on because Bob works with us. He's overseeing 3 shows that we were doing at once. Bob Kamlot. And then Bob Kamlot. And then the team concept is that the show itself was Dan's show. This is known as Dan's show in the office. There's even little moons around his door. And basically, which were given to him by Bill, they light up. And so the Dan show was basically the day-to-day nitty-gritty stuff was handled by Dan, and then Bob oversees the 3 shows at once, and then I come in and second-guess everything.
Dan, have you been part of the production company before?
I've worked with Jim before. Before this, he had general managed Catskills on Broadway, which I was the company manager for. And I had worked with him several years before that on Closer Than Ever, an off-Broadway show that he general managed. And we found out we worked well together, and so I pick up the pieces.
Well, that's what I wanted to say, because Jim said that you do the nitty-gritty. What is the nitty-gritty for
everything?
And then I want to see what Bob oversees, because I think that a lot of people are not clear on what each does. What does a company manager do? What does a general manager do? What do you do? What is the nitty-gritty?
Well, I see it as we do work, as Jim says, we do work together very well, and it overlaps. But generally speaking, he's the big picture, and he's another big picture. I'm the small picture. I do the weekly payroll, the paying of the weekly bills. I go to the theater and check the box office statement. I have an assistant who also does that. I deal with ticket problems, oversee group sales things. I deal with the advertising agency on billing. I work with Jackie pretty closely on press events and organization of those kind of things.
Reassure the clowns.
I go and check on these guys every night, see how they're doing.
No, he doesn't.
And the Red Clay Ramblers, they came in from North Carolina. They needed housing. I set up housing. I set up telephone lines. Their dressing rooms needed telephones. I work very closely with the stage manager, Jim Harker, and seeing how things are going. Work with the crews, see if they need adjustments on the curtains or the lighting, needing calls. And in that kind of area, what happens is that, say in a call, Jim Harker, the stage manager, would come to me, and then I would go to Bob Kamlot and say, it looks like we're going to need a call. And he then kind of ferrets out how many people, how many hours, and that kind of thing. And then I will go and translate that into the reality of it happening. And then I would, pay that bill.
Okay, and now to have you blanch, Bob, so it doesn't sound like you have anything to do at all.
That's all. I just wondered why he was here.
Exactly, I agree with you.
I don't know why I'm here either. I just collect the weekly paycheck. No, I joined...
Until today.
I joined Jim in October of last year. Actually, I had subleased some space from Jim while I was general manager and lent me a tenant. And so we got to know each other, and I was the lessee, and he was the lessor. And I paid my bills on time, and he thought that was pretty good. So one day in October, when he realized that he had 3 projects all happening at the same time, which was Wrong Turn at Lungfish, Full Moon, and the national tour of Catskills on Broadway, I think he felt he might need some assistance. So he asked me to join the organization. And basically what I do is whatever Jim doesn't want to do. If he doesn't want to do it, he says, Bob, take care of this. We tend to divvy up the 3 shows somewhat, and my main concentration actually during this period has been Catskills on Broadway, because as we said, Full Moon was Danny's show, and I do some work on Danny. Somehow they discovered that I was very good at labor negotiations and labor problems. So whenever there's a problem that deals with, whether it be the Stagehands Union or any of the other 14 unions that we deal with, they give it to Kamlot. Take care of it. An example, if you want.
Yes.
When we first started rehearsing, we had to get into the theater, and because so much activity takes place in the boxes and in the audience, Bill and David wanted to rehearse in the theater. Well, that's just not acceptable.
Why not?
Well, because we have certain work rules that preclude that unless you make some arrangement with the stagehands. So I went and did that and explained that it was a very special kind of show, and they needed to have access to the boxes, and they needed, because, I don't know, have any of you seen the show? How many of you have seen the show?
Oh.
Well, the rest of you better start coming. At any rate, they do an enormous amount of work in the boxes and in the theater, so I kind of handled that. I think if you want to describe what I do, I'm a problem solver. If there are no problems, I have nothing to do. If there are problems, I take care of them. I manage personnel, money, time, space, and equipment. And I deal with that as the need arises, and as Jim says, take care of it. And seriously, Jim is much more of a visionary than I am. He has a very long look at what he wants to see in the future, and I deal with the day-to-day problems. It has happened that my concentration has been primarily with Catskills on Broadway, a little bit with Lungfish, and very little with Full Moon, because Danny and Jim have it all, in hand, and there are very few problems to solve.
But what you described, is that generally what a general manager's duties are?
General managers manage money, time, space, personnel, and equipment. That's what we do. That's a definition of any management.
And contracts?
Well, of course. I mean, when you say contracts, that's managing personnel. I negotiated the theater contract for Full Moon. I negotiated and prepared Bill and David's contract, the rights agreement, and things like that. Obviously, always in consultation with the producers.
For all of us, what is your background in coming to
Well, let me add one
Robert?
thing. See, often he's a middle person for me. If I don't want to, I may not want to speak to the other side in a negotiation about something, but I want him to make certain points because I don't want them to have to deal directly with me because I don't want to have to give them an answer until I get something else to
say. It's the absentee partner agreement.
We play good cop, bad cop. Sometimes I'm the bad cop.
Good bad cop. It's only bad cop.
It's only bad cop.
What is your background coming to
I began as an actor when I was a child, and then discovered I couldn't make a living as an actor, and gravitated to management. And I started managing shows in 1956. Worked with the New York Shakespeare Festival for 11 years. General managed a number of shows for independent producers. General managed for quite some time, for 3 years, for Manny Eisenberg. And then did some shows independently. I did Fences. I did Lend Me a Tenor. And then I got connected with this organization, and I'm absolutely delighted. It's a nice relationship. We work well together. We don't always agree, but that's fine.
Jackie, I'd like to hear from you about your ideas on publicizing this wonderful production.
I'd like to hear that too.
So unique, so you couldn't start in the way most of us did in the old days. You had to take a new approach.
I learned it all from Jim Freydberg.
All right, come on.
Well,
come on.
okay. First, we had to find a way to describe the show, a way that would make everyone happy and make the show appealing to people. And we had to just find words to describe a show that didn't have many. So we found, I'm talking about the phrase, the details, like the phrase that you see in a magazine next to the Full Moon listing. We had to find something there. So we found something that everyone was happy with, I think.
Who is we?
We, everyone here, except you.
Gene was in on it.
Yes. And then the nuts and bolts of getting this show on from a press agent's point of view are similar to what you do.
When does the nuts and bolts start?
A couple months before, as far as putting together a program, sending out releases. We had some pictures from the Serious Fun, and then we had a photo call in December. But you wait until closer to the production to have actual production pictures, and a lot of our concern was what we would take pictures of that would represent the show. When you shoot video, which is standard part of Broadway now, what you shoot that you distribute to the news stations to accompany reviews or interviews. And then also, as far as television appearances go, what Bill and David would do that would represent the show.
Well, there's another thing about that. You didn't have a script either. I mean,
Right.
so you were like the normal press situation. I know Gina's gone through it all. Is how did you do it just in consultation with everybody talking about what it was? Had you seen it before?
No, I hadn't seen it.
So you had to start from not even with a script.
Right. Well, and a lot of it, people know Bill and or David, so it wasn't that I was saying, here are two guys you've never heard of before. So the people had some idea, and then the press, there was already some press interest as far as advanced features. And
What was the phrase you found to describe it?
an evening of sly humor, chaos, and music with the Red Clay Ramblers. Well, and Bill Irwin and David Turner and Bill Irwin.
Something about baggy pants.
So,
Yeah.
well, then there was, in the longer part of the press release, we had a quotes from Bill and David, which were sort of purposely cryptic, but I hope amusing.
Well, you invented them for us.
Well, no, no. They thought it was, I believe Bill said, when you try to describe an evening like this, which is wordless, without using words that might be problematic, like mime, Bill said, the quote Bill used was, I'm not at liberty to discuss it, but it's safe to say it involves physical danger and big pants, to which David responded, I've been asked not to comment. I think David really liked that.
And those really were quotes that Jackie invented for us, because at that stage of things, David was at home in Germany sometime, and here in New York briefly, and we were trying to rev up the belief that we really were going to have a show worth a Broadway ticket in about 6 weeks' time. So when Jackie would come to us and say, we need a description, or we need a quote from you guys, we tended to tell her to go mind her own business, because we had to find out how to make a door fall down, or how to make a trunk that would do a certain thing. So Jackie really invented those quotes and showed us, what do you guys think of this? That's good, yeah. I said that. So a lot of the things that you see in newspapers, especially in that critical pre-production period when everybody's nuts, you should take with a certain grain of salt, because usually there's a sort of bright and perky press agent.
Yeah.
Well, now okay. So we know now how it got there. Then it opened and got terrific reviews. So how do you keep the ball in the air?
Well, I think it's important to go what happened before that a little bit.
Okay,
because
fine. Well, yeah.
basically, the way our operation works is a little bit different than other people. We don't go on opening night the next morning and have an ad meeting. In reality, we don't have that at all. We basically come up with a program, which Jeff and I work on, and Dori is involved in it. Everybody's involved in it, but it's already planned. We already know what we're going to do. And we had a couple of mistakes that we made, a couple of assumptions that didn't work out, and a couple of things that did work out on this production. Number one is that we decided that we couldn't pre-sell it by doing a large amount of advertising because we didn't think we could sell it beforehand. And so we made a decision to sell it through the mail, through discounts. And our plan was that by doing those discounts, and by the way, we're doing another show at the same time, off-Broadway, which took a completely opposite view on. We viewed that one needed sales up
Which
front.
was that?
That was the Gary Marshall piece, The Wrong Turn at Lungfish, and that one we did a tremendous amount of advertising beforehand to pre-sell it. On this one, we made a decision that this one was going to make it in a different way. That one we felt was not going to make it on reviews, but was going to make it on who was in it, and our past experience of seeing it in other cities where the audiences loved it. This one, the decision was, no, we're not going to be able to pre-sell it. We're going to be dependent on critical acclaim, and what we're going to have to do here is to pre-sell it through the mail, like Lincoln Center mailing list and so on. And we expected that we would break even during those first 3 weeks through mail order business at heavy discounts, and we lost $102,000. So that did not work. In other words, if we had advertised also, we were right, Jeff and I. It would not have sold. So then we came to that big crucial moment of when we opened, and we were suddenly $102,000 in debt, actually, because it was over the financing. And here we were. We went out, and they come before the opening, and there they were, and the show happened to be as it usually is, but that night it was also kind of special because although it wasn't our wildest audience, which would have been may have worked against us in some cases. Sometimes when you have a very wild audience, the critics are not totally sure that this is real. It was a very real audience, and the performances were excellent. And we came out of there feeling, okay, we think we have it. Now the marketing plan had been that as soon as the reviews came out, that's when the real advertising would begin, and we would begin to flaunt what we got. It's an interesting thing I was thinking about this morning is when I personally realized we really had something, that we had a hit show. Strangely enough, it was the night after the invited dress rehearsal, because the very beginning of the show and the invited dress rehearsal didn't work very well. And it was different than what's there now. And overnight, the change that the two of them made in that opening was so extraordinary and so different than what had happened the previous night in one rehearsal period the next day, and was so extraordinary that I said, oh my goodness, this is it. It's going to make it big. Because if they can make a change like that, artistically, that quickly.
Jim, who knew that this needed to be done?
Everyone.
Your eye, the audience?
Everyone in the audience.
Even people who weren't at the theater that night seem to know.
That's an excellent question. And what we had to do was listen to ourselves, listening to the audience. We did a dress run-through, which was for an invited audience, and at the time I was furious with our producers because we had talked about a 200-300 people invited dress. Well, there were about 1,000 people there, and a lot of mink coats that you had to say hello to afterwards. Several. It seemed to us not a good idea, maybe overblown for a first look, but in fact, I guess I'll concede that probably the magnitude of our failure, our being off base on that one run-through night, showed us how much work we had to do by 8 o'clock the next night, and to our great surprise, we did a lot of it.
Well, I realize this is not a seminar. We've done that yesterday on playwriting, but in effect, this is the fastest playwriting going on. Is that you're really doing that physically? You're writing something.
Right. I guess you're right. Yeah.
But this is an unusual thing to have the performers of a show put that much input into what needs to be done or undone in a show, and the producer being part of the team as well.
Well, there's
normally,
no director, really.
Normally the performer doesn't have that say or that ear of the producer for what needs to be done. Or if he does, the producer says, well, it's working. They laughed. But in here, you had it. And so would you say that this is an important part of producing from now on?
Well, no, I think
based on this, or are these unusual people?
I think a key to producing is to know who really has the vision on a show. I think the biggest mistake a producer often has is when he actually believes that he has the vision. I see that in some of your forums now. I listen to producers talk, and you think that they created the show. A producer has several risks. One is financial. An artist has many more risks than a producer. An artist not only has financial, but he has an artistic risk, and he has a risk that he's on stage in a much different way. And what a producer is really, in a very kind of strange way, he's a midwife for an artist. What he's doing is helping that artist. But when a producer makes a mistake, it's when he actually believes that he has conceived it. He's helping it give birth. And when you listen to a lot of producers, I did this and I did that. Well, I have to tell you, I really didn't do anything. What I did, and what Jeff did, and what Dori did, and what Ken did, is we sat together and said, well, this didn't work so well, and we said, but these guys are brilliant, and they know that too. And we let that process happen. The process that's the mistake is when you go in and say, you screwed up this, they didn't like this, and what you end up with is total chaos. And when you hear this chaos around a show, that usually means there's a bad producer around the show. A producer who really doesn't know how to make people feel at
function
ease.
Too. Sometimes the directors, what you also describe is sometimes what a director's duty or lack or non-duty is here, which is interesting because that is the one.
Well, the director's a midwife as well.
Exactly, but what's interesting here is you don't have a director except in the case. Jeff, I wanted to come back to you because we kicked in the whole business about marketing, and I wanted to, once it happened, what was your take on it? Since this is really an expertise of yours, how did you decide, probably in concert with Jackie and everybody else, to market this?
Yes, it was a very collaborative effort from the beginning, with Bill and David as well.
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute because I think this is something that's bothered me a great deal. Unlike any other business, the theater says, come and see our show, that's all. They put out the blurbs and they take an ad in the Times and the Director's, and they expect people to come. Every other business goes out and uses an agency, advertising, direct mail, promotion, merchandising, to make customers to come into their show, to go out and find customers to come to the show. Why isn't that used more? Why isn't that part of, when you say marketing, how big a job did you do on marketing? How far did you go?
Well,
did you bring
as
buses in?
Jim
Did you bring
said,
airline people in? What did you do in marketing?
No,
Where did you get the
not
customers?
yet. We didn't. We haven't. As Jim said at the beginning, we did direct mail to Lincoln Center's list and to Manhattan Theater Club's list to bring in theater goers mostly, to begin to create a word of mouth. Then we waited, as Jim also said, for the reviews, which we felt strongly were going to be wonderful, and they were. So we utilized them. Now what we're finding is that people come to the show not knowing what to expect. What is it? It's two mimes. They're not going to talk. There's a band. So the word of mouth is very important, as it is on most shows. We've now, beginning tomorrow, are starting a new campaign, the thrust of which is ask anyone who's seen it. Because when people come to the show not knowing what to expect, they leave being completely delighted and having seen one of the funniest experiences they've ever had in a theater. So the word of mouth is enormously important. I brought the ad, actually, that we're going to start in the Times tomorrow. That's it, with a close-up of Bill and David, and the headline, Ask Anyone Who's Seen It.
You talked about, you went after theater goers in your direct mail list.
Mm-hmm.
What about going after people who weren't theater goers?
Well, that's
to try
what
and
we're
convert
doing
them?
now. We've put an enormous sign up in Times Square overlooking the tickets booth. We are doing 3 sheets, which are the big posters that will go at the train stations and the airports to bring in commuters and what we call bridge and tunnel crowd. We also are doing flyers for the hotels and in the tourist magazines where to now bring in. This is a show that can be very popular with the non-English speaking people, or non-anything speaking.
Let's go back to budget. Did you?
Well, let me just add something to that, because basically what we're working on now, when I said we don't have an ad meeting the day after the show opens, because we've already planned it, what we're working on right now is July and August. We've solved May and June. Now we're saying, okay, now we've got to get to the July and August audience, which is an audience that isn't normally in New York. It's a tourist audience. And so the plan that's going in now is one that's beginning to ask anyone. We know that most people who come to New York ask New Yorkers what to see. So we're playing right into that. So it's all a marketing plan that's out for the future. It's not necessarily going to have an effect on next week. It would be nice if it did, but next week looks pretty good already anyway. So it's going to
when you
have an
created
effect on
your
that.
budget, did you allow for word of mouth of monies to, at the beginning? Suppose you didn't get the reviews that you did. Would there have
Well,
been
I mean,
money
that's
in
a
the
very
budget?
good question, because we're talking about that we thought we had a show that would get very favorably reviewed and that we had a really good chance. Actually, the marketing plan that went into effect which involved a lot of quotes, would have still involved quotes, but would have been probably, we would have moved more quickly to television, which we're not doing at the moment, which would have been a different form of advertising.
And very expensive, too.
Yes, it would have been a much more expensive situation. We probably, up until that point, we were financed at $600,000. We were $102,000 in losses those first 3 weeks, and we were $30,000 over budget. So we were really $132,000 in trouble at that point. And I would have thought, I guessed that if the reviews didn't come through, that would have cost us another $250,000, which the general partners would have put up. We had agreed to do that.
Well, there are two things that come to mind. One is I'd like to get into the what is the budget for the whole show? Was it $600,000?
It was $600,000.
Right, which is pretty low for a Broadway show.
Which is extraordinarily low.
Yeah, exactly. And the other,
I should add why that was because these were two performers. There's nobody that can understudy them. You can't have subsidiary rights. Regional theaters can't be doing the show. Can't be done by other people. And so when you have a show like that, and the fact that you could have, God forbid, an injury to one of them, or it might be or somebody could become sick. And by the way, we did have one of them become sick, and we did lose some performances. But the point is that when you know you have a show like that, then you have to begin to concentrate on your financing to take in those points of view that are going to happen. Those things. You have to realize that you're going to have to recoup quicker than most shows, that you're going to have to stay on top of things. And in the finances of it, both David and Bill, in many ways, were brought into that. Because when they would decide to do something, we would then start to price it out and discuss it with them. But our purpose was to make sure that artistically they were getting everything they could get and everything they needed, which meant that we might have to take it away from something else. But that was what we were doing. And so, in fact, one of the reasons we became over budget, over the 600 to 630, was because there were some technical things that weren't working out so well in the show when we first started, and we realized we had to rehearse a lot more than we had originally planned to. So to make those things work with stagehands and so on in the theater. And so that raised the cost. But that was a very, very, very wise investment on our part. Because those moments have become the highlights of the show.
Who came up with the title?
We talked on the telephone a lot about what the title should be, and finally David said, what do you think about Full Moon? And I don't even think it was our most wildly enthusiastic choice for a while, but then...
I wanted to try and find something that was synonymous with clown and something that would indicate this style of work. So, you know, Full Moon, why not Full Moon? And we wanted to have a moon in it and stars, and we wanted to try and find some kind of red line through the show, something very simple that would sort of create a nice structure for the sketches that we put into the show.
Jackie, did you find the graphics person to do that wonderful poster?
No, that was someone at Gray.
It was done with you, Jeff. Yeah.
And it was Gray that came up with Anything Can Happen Under a Full Moon.
So you now have, you have had and continue to have a producing company. You're one of the few producers that continue to produce on Broadway with a company, with a general manager, with a staff. And so that you can bring to it your knowledge and the background of what is too expensive or where the money should be cut or where the money should go. In your budget now, how do you work that in? Who decides on television is too expensive?
The initial budget is done by me. And then it's refined by Bob.
Mm-hmm. I get to shoot the holes in it.
It's handed to him and say, okay, second guess me, do anything you want. And then we kind of, in a way, he'll call me and say, yeah, but this is wrong because it's exactly this. And I'll say, yeah, but I wasn't doing exact. I want you to do exact. I'm an overall thing. This is what I'm looking for it to be. And I have a percentage column down the right-hand side off of the computer. And it's basically, I'm looking for certain things to cost a certain percentage of the overall financing. And I can't even tell you what that is. Each show is different. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes I'll say, this show needs to have 35% of its budget to be in financing. This one needs it to be 20 to be in advertising. This one needs to be 40. I don't know what makes me come up with that, but when I come through the whole thing, that's what I'm looking for. to maneuver that into some position. And that tells me about what the financing is going to be. In this case, I felt that a very small percentage should be in pre-production of financing, of advertising. But in the case of the other show, I felt it should be over 40%. And this one, I felt it should be 20% in advertising. So that's how the budget, I don't know what the bottom line is. It begins to form that way, and then suddenly that begins
That's
to
what I'd like to get into, as to what percentage of the whole, and where do you say you don't know what the bottom line is, but obviously you have to look at it, and you do know.
I'm talking about initially. I eventually
But
know.
we're going to take a short break now, and there'll be questions from the audience, and so please don't go away. Just stand up, take a deep breath, turn around, and sit right down again, so we can start with this. We're continuing the discussion on what it is to work in the theater, one of the wing seminars that we do coming from the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. And this seminar that we've been talking about and talking on is the production of Full Moon, what it is to put a show on Broadway. The wonderful stars of Full Moon are here, the manager, the production manager, everybody involved in the nitty-gritty part of putting on the show, along with George White and Jean Dalrymple, who are co-moderating. We're going to pick up where we left before on who does what on the show and how it works. So who's going to start that?
Well, I'd like to see how it works, because this is a very, very special show. And the two creators are here. As I say, this wasn't really a playwriting seminar, but anyway, it is, in a sense, it's a creating seminar. And I assume the show changes to a degree every night, depending on the audience. And I would love to have you talk a little bit about how you interact, because there are those who haven't seen the show, and those even that have, remind them of what goes on. What do you do? Bill, you want to start? And then
Within the show?
Within the show, and how it was created and what you do.
Well, of course, the two of us present these producers with a different kind of relationship than is usually the case on a Broadway show. It makes for a very slimmer, trimmer poster, because there are our names and the names of the Red Clay Ramblers, and the seven of us who appear on stage every night really created the show. So there's not a separate playwright, there's not a choreographer other than us, there's not a musical director other than the Ramblers themselves. And in some ways it sort of simplifies the process. They only deal with the two of us as the prime directors, writers, and performers. And sometimes in some ways it complicates the process, because the two of us are wearing all those hats, and we had to, especially in the pre-production and in the previews, had to be doing a lot of jobs at the same time. And we continue to do so every night. So I look over across the wings sometimes, just before David and I go on for, say, the T for Two number, and he's going... So I remember, new bits, yeah. Don't forget the new hat bit that we talked about. Drop your cane. So the show is in constant evolution. We're not quite working at that sort of lightning, white-hot speed that we were doing previews. And so in many ways it's a very different kind of relationship between creators and producers, because there are fewer of us and we're doing more jobs at the same time than in the usual Broadway show.
Does it change to that extent that you have to worry about cues for your stagehands if you're going to change a piece of business because if you feel it's not working with the audience?
Well, sometimes. I mean, one will need to change a lighting cue or something that there's not enough light in the audience. For example, when we go out into the audience, we need more light, or we've changed something that isn't working as well as it was the week before. And plus, there's the personal problem of sometimes you just feel down one night and you think what you're doing is crummy and it's not working, and you want to change the whole thing the next day, and people will say, "Don't, Dave, calm down. It's working. It's fine." No, it stinks. We got to have a rehearsal about this, and then the next day you come in, you're stronger, you feel better, and you realize it is working, it is fine, and there's so many different levels.
Performance, what happens if you feel that way?
How do you gear yourself up?
How do you pull yourself up? Because there's only yourself to pull yourself up. There aren't lines, there aren't other people on stage with you. What do you do to pull yourself up? What do you do to recapture
They don't know.
the audience? It's obviously the audience is involved in this. You feel that there's no reaction.
Well, I mean, oftentimes I don't know how Bill does it, but so oftentimes I just force myself. I just think you've got to do this. You have no choice. You just can't go out there and you have no choice. And I mean, there's no magic formula. There's no suddenly, oh, my public is there. They're waiting for me. No, it becomes a very hard job, and the amount of stamina and energy you need to sustain those 2 hours is just unbelievable. I don't think people really understand how much an actor needs for this kind of show to sustain it night after night, week after week. It's
well, particularly because now you might deal with the audiences obviously vary night to night, and if you get a down audience, which I can't imagine for the show because you pump them up rather than, I imagine it's a collaborative effort between the audience and you, isn't it? And
well, we were just talking about that last night. Sometimes when we're coming down off the moon, we will say, wow, that was kind of a dull crowd tonight, but of course the audience doesn't hear that. But especially in this kind of show, which has such a delicate balance, because there really is a give and take between the performer and the audience. You really are expecting that the audience gives you some energy back, because as especially doing clown work and physical slapstick, and here we are again trying to describe what it is. You need that response. You need that laughter. You need to know that the audience is there and they're behind you.
But every performance needs that, I think.
Well, you know, a play.
It's a question of how you get it.
Well, no, we want laughs. We want to invoke as much laughter as possible, and we want to know that the audience is there and they're following us. If you have a play, a serious play, there's not a lot of laughter. There's a lot of silence. You just have to trust yourself as an actor that you're doing okay, that the piece is working.
You do quite a bit before the show actually starts with the audience.
We scout them thoroughly.
Well, okay.
Could you tell us what you do?
Yeah, tell us about that.
And how you do that? Or how does the audience react, or are those people that know you?
And what are you looking for when you say scout? Yeah, what are you doing?
Well,
how do you do it?
I would be very hesitant to reveal where the place in the curtain is that we peek through. But there are a couple, and David especially scouts the audience. I'll let you reveal your secrets if you care to. But the relationship with those people, in fact, the other side of the coin of what David's saying is true also. The pressure is there, and the sometimes excruciating responsibility is there because, indeed, our public is out there, and they have invested their evening and a fair amount of money in coming to see that show. That's what puts the pressure on you. And when we're coming down on the moon, this is what the curtain in, is that the finish of the show is our ascending on the moon after an evening of a lot of wild physicality. The two of us going up still on the moon has turned out to be the best final moment for the show, as we found. But then the curtain comes in and we have to ride back down, and the band is scrambling around to get in position to play the bow music. And we often do say, well, that was not the top of the line that night. And when we say, that was not the wildest crowd we've ever had, of course, we've been doing this long enough to know that in many ways, what we're really saying is, we didn't lift them out of their chairs tonight. It was really, we didn't lift things. And that's when you ask yourself the question you were asking, well, what do you do about it? You have to look back into years of craft and figure out, what will spark me to spark them to spark us back?
Well, that's right. But it's also very, sometimes this whole thing can be so confusing because you're not getting back what you're putting out. You're putting out all this energy and you want a response because, I mean, we bring people on stage, we work directly with them, so we're provoking. The audience becomes part of the show, whether they like it or not. And so you're hoping that there will be a response. And when there isn't, oftentimes you think, well, I'm just really bad tonight. I'm not putting out what I should be putting out. But some nights you're putting out 150% and still nothing's coming back. And you think, boy, it's just too bad that they're not giving anything back. And then at the end of the show, they stand up. So you can't figure it out.
I want to say something.
I
want to say something like this. This is something very unusual that's happened. We have 3 comedies running right now. And every night on my answering machine, each stage manager calls in and gives me a detailed report on everything that's happened in that show, including the audience reaction from beginning to end. And there's a very strange pattern, and that is that consistently all three stage managers' reports about the audiences have been the same almost every night. When your audience is quiet and doesn't stand, so are the other two. When your audience is quiet and they stand at the end, almost 80% of the time, the others do too. And there's something, I've always had a theory about audiences. It's a really strange thing about audiences and what's in the air and what our moods are as people and how people come in. And it seems to be that this pattern has been fairly consistent. There was one night, I think it was last Tuesday or something, where both shows had very quiet audiences and both got standing ovations at the end.
Is there a difference between a matinee audience and an evening audience?
A big difference.
Do you find, Jim, that there's a difference that Saturday night audiences tend to be somewhat down? Because
not in this show.
Not in this
That's
show.
one of the big differences in Full Moon, is that the Saturday night audience reports have been consistently unbelievable, much higher. And that also has been the case in the Gary Marshall show, too, strangely enough, of late. But in this show, it's been unusual that way, that usually Saturday night audiences are that way. They're kind of quiet.
Why is
not
that?
in this show.
Because they come, it's usually a date audience, it's usually an event audience. We go out on Saturday night, and there's a desperation to have a good time.
It's also a show.
Rather than just going with it, just letting it flow, you know. It becomes, Saturday night is a special, kind of thing.
And there's more full-price tickets, so they want to say, show me, prove it.
Exactly.
All right, I'm ready. Rather.
But in this show, the audience reactions on Saturday night have been extraordinary, consistently, right from the very first Saturday night preview we ever did.
Since we're talking about audiences, do you have a cut-price ticket? Do you have a rush ticket? Do you have...
We have a lot of different ranges, yes.
You have what?
We have a lot of different ranges, and of course there's always ways to get tickets for every Broadway show. When we hear about, Broadway tickets are $65, well, Broadway tickets are $65 if you're lazy. But they're really not $65 if you know how to get tickets for less.
If you go to TDF.
Yeah, not just that.
What about
not
the box
TDF,
office?
you can go to the half price. Our box office, we have a low price of $25. And it's not for a ticket it's a ticket that we normally sell. We say it's obstructed because it's in the second section of the mezzanine. And we normally sell it at the booth for either 25%, which is $18 or whatever it is, or $12, something like that. We also have a group sale situation where you can buy a group in a certain way at the last minute for a big discount as well.
This is very much a family show, too, that has enormous appeal for children. And the matinees, the Sunday matinees and the Saturday
Do you have
matinees.
a child bringing a grandparent for free?
No. We don't need to do that.
I think what you find with Full Moon is that you have an adult audience come and love it, and some of them weren't expecting to love it as much as they do, and they are coming back and bringing grandparents and bringing children, bringing families, and in the summertime, I think bringing out-of-town guests. I think there's a lot of repeat business.
I'm sure.
We've been asked why there hasn't been family prices on parents who want to bring their children to a theater. They said that it's so expensive. Wouldn't there be a family price if you had
Well, I
four
think there's
tickets,
been a
two
big
children?
problem with that. Our price, by the way, is the lowest price on Broadway.
You want to say how much it
Our
is?
top price is $45, and our low price is $25. And you can still buy us at
Why
the booth
does it have
and
to
so
be
on.
$45 when it's only two people and one...
Because it's all right. No, wait a second.
let's deal with
Wait a
that.
second. It's two people and it's 5 musicians and it's 14 stage managers, not stage hands, and it's stage. And we still pay rent for the theater, and we still have all the economics that everybody else. And we spend $45,000 a week on advertising, sometimes more. It still is the cost, and yet we are still able to do it at a lower price than any of the other
What's your
shows
weekly
on
nut?
theater. Our weekly nut runs about $150,000 to $160,000 a week, depending on what we're spending on advertising. And there's nothing you can do about it. Do I agree with the economics of the theater at the present time? No. I wish everybody would say, let's all take cuts and get it down to a realistic price. But the fact is, it's not happening. I'll do it.
I have to ask-
but nobody else seems to want to. And Bill and David, I can tell you, have.
Is there any way of doing it? I'm going to, before we turn this over to questions, that's my one question constantly. Is there any way to cut the
Yes,
difference?
if the theater owners and the producers are willing to take a strike that would shut down Phantom of the Opera, Les Mis, and all those shows like that, yes, there is. And I will tell you that they would be crazy to do that economically, and that's why they're not doing
Not
it.
for the
That
future.
is the problem.
Not if
And
you
also, if there were more professional producers, instead of people coming into this industry who really aren't producers, that are from other industries, and passing on the responsibility financially to other people to handle for them. We have an industry that does not have management that is within, that is on top of their business. It's not their primary business. And it's the reason that we were able, as professional producers, to mount this show for $600,000 instead of $1.5 million, which many other producers would be done. And it's the reason that some shows are mounted for $10 million that should really be mounted for $4 million. It's because there's lack of management in the industry. We could spend 10 hours on that some other time.
No,
That's the
I
problem.
agree with you, and that's one of the reasons why we do these seminars, is to be able to have people like you pass on that knowledge, but there aren't enough around. And I think it's so important for the future of the theater that we have experienced people, not just for this one show, but
very
all.
briefly, Isabel, is one thing I will tell you that I really think was the key to the change in this industry. In the era of the great producers, the really great producers, like these people here, who did that for a living, they didn't have a situation where a producer could make money on a show even if the investors didn't. In other words, there weren't producers' royalties. The object was the producer made money when he paid back the investor. Now, the producer can make money even if he doesn't pay back the producer. And as long as that exists, the economics of this business are destroyed, and that's why there's fewer shows happening, and that's why when we hear about the great producers, we hear about the Robert Whiteheads, and we hear about people like yourself, we hear about those people because they were the great producers, because they really did it for a living and for a love of the theater. They weren't from some other business looking to take a lot from it and not give to it. And if we can get more people doing this for a living, we will have better economics.
My name is Mel Silverman. I'm an avid theater goer who was not at all sure he wanted to see this show. I've seen it 3 times, and I've become really great fans of the 2 performers, and I'd like to ask, if I may, how you manage to select audience members who can perform so effectively with you and produce such laughter with different audiences every night.
Well, first of all, it's not 100% effective every night. That's the main problem, and that's why my hair is getting thinner. And I've been working with people and directly with people on the streets, in the circus, in the theater for almost 15 years, and working with so many different types of people from all over the world, because when I was working on the streets, there were always tourists from every part of the world. You just begin to judge very quickly by the clothes they're wearing, how they're sitting, how they're looking at you, how they're talking to their friends, what kind of personality type they are, and what they would best be suited for if I brought them on stage. And so I'm looking for those types of things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to ask Bill Irwin. I think it would be interesting to know if you would just explain to us what it was that happened that first evening that was maybe artistically miscalculated, what the response was that made the change, and how you figured out to make the right change.
That's a very good and challenging question. We did, as I mentioned before, an invited dress rehearsal the night before our first paid audience, our first actual audience, at least half full of people who really were paying money to see us. And all through the rehearsals for the show and the discussions, the sometimes long-distance phone, sometimes late into the night, just talking about what the show should be, which is all in the abstract, of course, because it doesn't happen until the people are there. But we kept thinking we ought to have some dialogue at the top of the show, which will, A, right away show people they're not in a mime show. It'll also, it's stuff I enjoy writing and doing, and it'll settle people in, and then we'll do the rest of the show. And in fact, when we did the sort of prototype version of the show back in the summer for 2 evenings at Lincoln Center, we did do some dialogue at the top of the show. So this was, we kept changing our minds about what the dialogue should be every other day of rehearsal. We'd come in with rewrites, but we were absolutely sure that the show should start with some speaking. We put those mic packs on, and we went out there the first night and did it in front of this invited dress audience and realized that was as wrong as it could possibly be. And we had, like I said before, till 8 o'clock the next night to figure out what the opening of the show, which is the time you either get people or lose them, ought to be without dialogue, how it ought to somehow come into sync with what the rest of the show was, a lot of which we have since changed, and we knew then that was wrong too, but we certainly felt that the opening moments were not what we wanted to be. So we came in, and as Jim says, very expensive stage time the next day. One of the great challenges for creators in the theater is to walk out on the stage and sort of kick things and think about the people out there, when in fact everybody behind you wants you to make some decisions. Show some people where to go. Move him over there and tell us what you're going to do tonight at 8 o'clock. What David and I did was go up into the part of the audience box and figure out how I ought to come out and somehow get him tangled up and get him down onto the stage, and it ought to be excruciatingly funny, and it ought to take about 4 minutes. So, and what you need to do in doing that is to sort of rub your eyes and let conscious thought go away for a while. So at about $18,000 a minute, that's what.
Well, you know what's interesting about that is when I was working with Bill putting the show together is there were moments when we would be stuck. For example, in the opening, and I'd be sitting up in that box going, "What are we going to do?" And I remember what we finally figured out. I remember Bill was working with the microphone, and I was sitting in the box going, "Well, what are we going to do?" And suddenly he just showed up with the microphone in the box, and he started some bits in the box. He was just playing around, and those bits, I thought, whoa. And it just started to cascade, and it's interesting how things will just develop that way.
Does that answer?
Well, I think there's one additional thing very quickly to that, and that is that the most important thing that happened during that day is not one producer went in the theater. Because that could have caused a problem of get speeded up and do this and do, it's going to cost us that. Everybody was smart enough to stay away, and that's good producing.
I have to say that's true. We had screamed at them the night before. I'm not sure, but no, that's absolutely true. Nobody came in and told us what to do. Nobody came in and told us you really ought to be using these minutes faster, fellas. Don't you think you could show us some staging, or maybe there's some paper that you generated the night before? We had not. We just knew there was a chunk of the show that was absolutely wrong. We had to look for a way that made it feel righter, and then we had 12 previews from then until judgment is passed by the critics to refine that and get it righter and righter. And there's just one thing I'd like to throw in those lessons learned category. A show like this, Jim is right, and we all nodded in agreement. You have to keep it as inexpensive as possible in putting it on. That will allow for family ticket prices. That will allow for a show to go on Broadway where the people doing it are the only people who can do it. We all knew we had to keep capitalization down. The one thing that I would think differently in terms of priorities and looking back is that when you have a show with no out-of-town tryouts and only 12 previews, as we had 12 or 13 previews before you go and play for the people who are going to tell you whether you're good or bad, every minute of rehearsal time on the stage has to be thought of as necessary. And we made the mistake of not thinking every minute would be. Maybe we could only use half the time. And again, it's several $100s a minute, not several $1,000s a minute. Now I look back and we realize that's when a show like this, in many ways, comes together. That's when the playwriting is done. Before that, you're sort of noodling in the abstract, and you're kind of thinking, wouldn't it be great if... But when you get in front of preview audiences, they tell you, no, that's not so great. Yes, that's great. And so if you took that farther, you'd be better off. It's then the time with the stagehands, who I think generally earn every dollar of those precious hours, because they're there pulling ropes, they're pulling them one way, they're putting them back. A couple of skinny actors tell them, pull it harder and faster, so they do it harder and faster. They make the things work that we want to have work, and it costs a lot of money during those precious hours because the lights are on, all the stagehands are working very hard. If ever we should do this again, I would just say that we would have to plan on having every minute conceivable to rehearse in the theater under the lights before the next preview audience. Then you see what that audience says, and then you go the next day and do it all again, because then you've learned a little bit more.
Well, one addition to that is every time you do a show as a producer, you learn something. Every show's different. the financing, everything's different. You learn something every time you do a show. That was an unexpected thing that we learned, and the next time we do something, that will be in there because we'll know. But the greatest thing about this business is it's never the same. That makes you want to come back again.
Would you ask your next question?
Yes, my question is to the good producer, to find out what his early work experience was that led up to your being able to instinctively budget and make decisions. What was the beginning of your work experience as a producer?
Jeff?
That's
No,
you,
that's
right?
you. Sorry, sir.
Or Dori.
Mr. Freydberg. Freydberg, sorry.
I was in Wall Street 30 years ago, and I was a block trader. So that's where I learned risk.
But since I work in the theater, I don't know what a block trader is.
Somebody would call me and say they have 2 million shares of Greyhound to sell. And I'd say, what's it selling at now? And they'd say 22, and I'd say, I'll pay you 19 and a half for it, and I'd buy it, and then I'd trade it out. And it was an instinctive thing of understanding risk and being able to go to bed that night and sleep knowing that if I was wrong, millions would be lost. Well, that risk part of this is, and this is a very high-risk business, don't fool yourself. I mean, when you buy that block, you're losing the Wall Street firm that you work for. When you buy the block here, you're losing your own. And so this is risky. And once you learn risk, and you learn how to deal with risk, you learn how not to get nervous in risk, then you learn how to make decisions. And a lot of it is instinctive feelings of what tells you in your guts about something. And I've done a lot of shows, and I guess you sort of can look at something and decide what you think it would cost after a while. It's hard to explain.
What job made you leave
Every
broker
job I've ever
dealing?
had has taught me for the next job I've done. Every show I've ever done, just what Bill was just saying. I learned a lot from that moment of when we had to do stuff on stage, and I learned it for the next thing.
What was the job that took you away from Wall Street and brought you into the nefarious world?
I was
theater?
very I found it boring. I didn't like dialing for dollars. I really wanted to do something else. I found myself uncreative, and I wanted to do something. And since I wasn't really creative, I couldn't write, I couldn't dance, I could crack a joke, but stuff like that. I realized that I really wanted to be somebody who worked with people who were creative and be in a support position where I could be helpful in that process. And I found that rewarding. Occasionally I go and direct just to see what bad
I think we have just time for a quick question.
Well, I was going to ask, my name is Adam Kovacs, if a show isn't doing too well, how do you decide when to close it without losing too much money?
Oh dear, I don't want to end on that.
You almost answered it now.
I thought that's a decision that a producer makes economically, I guess. Isn't that?
Yeah, I think that's the same as a decision, should I produce the show?
Yeah, that's
I mean,
part of that, I think.
That's
but that's a terrible way to end this seminar, because I think that this show is going to go on and on and on, and I am once more, I'm out of apologies for not being able to continue with the questions that we want to continue with and to get the answers that everybody wants, but you have all been so very constructive, and you've helped so much in telling what it is that went into putting on Full Moon, this extraordinary production that's at the Richard Rogers Theater. And the producers and the creative people here have given so much of their time, and it's been so thoughtful in telling us how it is to work in the theater, from the end of the production company, from the nitty-gritty work all the way through to the creative work that the audience sees and appreciates. This seminar is coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, and it is one of the programs of the American Theater Wing's year-round programs. I'm Isabel Stevenson, president of the American Theater Wing, and I thank you all for coming here.
just